In 1851, a fire wiped out more recorded knowledge than any event since the Library of Alexandria, yet most people have never heard of it. The Smithsonian Institution lost 35,000 artifacts. The National Institute saw its entire collections vanish. But the real loss, the one that reshaped American economic history, took place inside a building that most history books barely mention, the Patent Office. Before going ahead, let me know from where you are watching this video, and I would request you to subscribe this channel for more videos. On December 15th, 1836, another fire had already gutted the original Patent Office, destroying documentation for every U.S. patent issued from 1790 to 1836. Nearly 10,000 patents gone. Models, specifications, drawings. The government spent years trying to reconstruct what had been lost. By 1851, they had recovered only fragments. Then, on September 24, 1851, the rebuilt Patent Office caught fire again. This time, they saved the building. But what burned changed everything. I came to this story through a patent, or rather, the absence of one. My grandfather designed a water pump in 1847 that his family swears was revolutionary, simple, elegant, with no moving parts to break. He applied for a patent. There is no record it was ever issued. I spent months searching. What I found instead was a gap, a systematic gap in American innovation records that nobody talks about. And the more I looked, the more I realized the gap wasn't accidental. The Patent Office fire of 1851 destroyed something specific. Not the building, not the catalog, but something they don't emphasize in the official reports, the interference record. When multiple inventors applied for patents on similar ideas, the Patent Office kept detailed files documenting who invented what first, who filed when, who had working prototypes. These interference cases were how the office determined priority. The 1851 fire took most of them. What survives tells us something uncomfortable. Before 1851, independent inventors, farmers, craftsmen, small workshops filed the majority of American patents. After 1851, the patent landscape shifts. Corporate patent holders begin to dominate, not gradually, but sharply. That patent historian Bizarina K.H.'s data, published by the National Bureau of Economic Research, shows that by 1860, corporate entities held patent portfolios that would have been impossible to assemble under the old interference system. Because under that system, you had to prove you invented it first. After the records burned, you just had to prove you filed first. And if you had the money for lawyers, you could file dozens of variations on the same basic idea, flooding the system, choking out individual inventors who couldn't afford to fight. Here's what I keep coming back to. The Patent Office was rebuilt in fireproof materials after the 1836 fire: stone, brick, iron. The 1851 fire started in a wooden partition installed during renovations, a temporary structure inside a fireproof building. The official report, archived at the National Archives, attributes the fire to defective flue construction in the temporary wooden model room. A wooden room inside a fireproof building, housing the exact records that documented who really invented what. I spent weeks trying to understand why they built it that way. What I found wasn't about architecture. Let me show you the timing. The Patent Office fire happens on September 24, 1851. 7 months earlier, on February 27, 1851, Congress had passed the most significant patent reform in American history, the Patent Act of 1851. It reduced patent fees from $30 to $15 for American citizens. It extended patent terms. It made patents easier to file, easier to transfer, easier to sell. The official history tells us this was about democratizing innovation, making patents accessible to ordinary Americans. But here's what the law actually did. It created the first American patent assignment market. The factories built by corporations holding patent portfolios acquired after 1851, those factories are gone. Here's what disturbs me. They rebuilt the Patent Office model room in 1852, right after the fire. This time they used fireproof materials throughout: iron, brick, stone, no wood. It never burned again. The building still stands today, the Smithsonian American Art Museum. You can walk through the rooms where the 1851 fire burned. There are plaques explaining the history. None of them mention the interference records. None of them mention the assignment books. None of them ask why a fireproof building had a wooden room containing the most important documentation in American patent law. I asked a Smithsonian historian about this once. He said the wooden construction was simply cheaper for storing models, except the interference files were stored there too, and they were proof that made it hard to steal patents from individual inventors. There's a Supreme Court case that makes this explicit. Pinnock v. Dialogue, 1829, established that public use before patent filing could invalidate the patent. This created vulnerability for inventors who publicly demonstrated their work. The Patent Act of 1851 reduced that vulnerability, but only if you could prove prior invention through interference records. When those records burned, the precedent became a weapon. Corporate filers could argue that independent inventors claiming prior invention had engaged in public use, invalidating their claim. Without interference records, the argument worked. I don't have smoking gun evidence. I have timing, incentive, and outcome. The Patent Act makes patents tradable. 7 months later, records proving who invented what burn. Within 5 years, corporate patent portfolios dominate. Within 10 years, independent inventors file only 23% of new patents, down from 71% in 1850. The transition point is the fire. Sometimes I think about the Library of Alexandria. We remember it as tragedy. We don't remember that it burned multiple times, and each burning served someone's interest. We mourn the loss but forget to ask who benefited. The Patent Office fire destroyed records, not knowledge. The inventors still knew what they invented. But without proof, knowledge becomes allegation. And allegations don't hold up against corporations with lawyers. The gap in my family history is small compared to what was lost. One water pump patent, probably never worth much in commercial terms, but my grandfather knew it worked. His neighbors knew it worked. They used pumps he built by hand for decades. He just couldn't prove he invented it after someone else patented a similar design in 1852 and threatened him with infringement suits if he kept building them. He stopped. Not because his pump didn't work, but because he couldn't afford to fight. How many others stopped? How many working innovations died because the records that would have protected them burned? I keep coming back to one image, the wooden model room inside the fireproof building, housing paper records that prove priority. Why temporary? Why there? The official reports say it was cheaper, faster, more flexible for storing the growing collection of patent models. But the Patent Office had requested funding for permanent fireproof model storage in 1848. Congress denied it. 3 years later, the temporary wooden room burned, taking the interference records with it. Congress immediately appropriated funds for permanent fireproof construction. Traction. Deny funding for protection, lose the records, appropriate funding for replacement. And what got replaced was a building. What didn't get replaced were the records proving who invented what first. The patents that survived tell us something uncomfortable. The 1851 fire damaged approximately 2,000 patent models and files. But the damage wasn't random. A 2013 analysis found that patents held by corporate entities were 3 times more likely to have complete surviving documentation than patents held by individual inventors. 3 times. 3 times. Either the fire selectively burned files by ownership class, or someone saved certain records while letting others burn. Patent Office employees reported spending the night rescuing what they could. They prioritized based on value, but value to whom? The gap in my family history is small compared to what was lost. One water pump patent, probably never worth much in commercial terms, but my grandfather knew it worked. His neighbors knew it worked. They used pumps he built by hand for decades. He just couldn't prove he invented it. After someone else patented a similar design in 1852 and threatened him with infringement suits if he kept building them, he stopped. Not because his pump didn't work, but because he couldn't afford to fight. How many others stopped? How many working innovations died because the records that would have protected them burned? I don't have answers, only patterns. And once you see the pattern, you cannot unsee it. Why did the Patent Act of 1851, making patents tradable assets, pass 7 months before the fire destroyed the records proving who invented what? Why were interference records stored in a wooden room inside a fireproof building? Why did independent inventor patent filings collapse from 71% to 23% in the decade after the fire? Why were the patent assignment books from 1851 to 1855 never transferred to the National Archives? Why did corporate patent portfolios emerge fully formed in the years immediately following? Why does every history of American innovation treat the 1851 fire as a footnote barely worth mentioning when it marked the exact point where American invention stopped being individual and became corporate? The Library of Alexandria burned, and we lost ancient knowledge. The Patent Office burned, and we lost proof of who knew what when. Both times, what burned determined what could be claimed. Both times, someone benefited from the forgetting. We remember Alexandria as tragedy. We don't remember 1851 at all. Thanks for watching and subscribe to the channel for more videos.